Hello, everyone. So good to see so many people here on this call. I definitely learned so much from Frieda every single week, and I'm so glad that we have connected. So we met through organizing nationally for Public Citizen. I am not here on the behalf of that organization, but that is the worth fighting for campaign is where we were able to be connected, which came about, including with Mary too, actually. And it came about since post the Trump 11-5 election, and it's really great to have the opportunity to be connected with someone who is so well informed on where we can go from here, how we can dream of a better world, of a better society. And I feel like it's exactly the kind of information we should be absorbing in a time like this. So, really glad to see everyone here. Always an honor to be able to take part. And I think Mary might have already mentioned a bit about herself, but maybe I'll pass it back to you and then we could get this presentation started.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, JJ.
Thank you. So yes, I'm Mary Linda Moss, artist and activist in LA. We started after the election, organization Northeast Los Angeles Alliance for Democracy. And as I was saying earlier, we have a local monthly meeting. We are championing education and trainings, created from within our group. We have an amazing group of journalists, professors, educators, writers, and Frieda, we are so grateful, is a part of that team. And the idea is allowing for the most effective response to what is happening in our country through informed activism. And so I am grateful to be here and help facilitate. I'm going to say just a couple things about the meeting. Like you heard if you were here when we started the recording, it's going to be recorded. Each session is recorded so that people who miss it or so you can go back later and listen to it. But we will not be recording the conversation that will happen after. So Frieda will be doing her presentation, and then afterwards there will be an opportunity for discussion. We're going to ask people to limit their discussion. We'll have a 1 minute and then a 1 minute wrap up. We're going to ask everyone to get a chance to speak before someone speaks for a second time. We are going to mute everyone, and we're going to turn off the chat during the session so that people can focus. JJ or myself may put a few links in the chat during the session, but please turn your chat off so you're not distracted and you can see it when you come back on. And we're just really grateful that you are all here because this is the work that is going to be making a difference in community, relating and informing. And so I just want to once again, so appreciative to have the honor to introduce Frieda Afary, an Iranian American socialist feminist activist, translator, and writer. If you've been to any of her sessions before this one or others, you know that she is able to grasp things and translate them in a way that has a depth and breadth, but also accessibility. I appreciate it. So I am really grateful to have Frieda here speaking with us once again on Humanist Alternatives, Education and Critical Thinking. Thank you, Frieda.
Thank you, JJ and Mary Linda. I really appreciate your introductions. And I'm so happy that despite the terrifying times that we're living through, the Indivisible Network and M.L.I.S have given us the opportunity to bring people together from around the country and have these types of discussions. It is really something that I've never seen before in the US on this level. So it gives me a lot of hope. So I have a presentation. I'm going to read most of it because it has a lot of details. And JJ will kindly move the slides. Next slide, please. Okay, so, and here, if you would like to take a look at the various parts of the content for a moment before I start. So the introduction is education and history under assault. In its first 10 weeks in office, the second Trump administration's blitzkrieg on our civil and human rights has included the orders to shut down the Department of Education and the Institute for Museum and Library Services. Can everyone hear me? There you go. As well as the denial of federal funding to public schools, universities, libraries, and museums with programs that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. These assaults are the latest blows in the long-term Republican effort to privatize schools, make them religious, erase US history, take away academic freedoms, and replace them with ideology and hate speech. While New York, Illinois, and a few other states are standing up to the banning of DEI programs, US historian David Blight has taken a public stand against Trump's recent executive order, which is called, the executive order is called Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History. In an opinion piece in the New York Times, Blight wrote, "Most Americans do care about the country's past. They actually prefer complexity to patriotic straitjackets. World War II, the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, the women's and gay rights movements, and the struggle to learn Native American history have changed America forever." I highly encourage you to read the full opinion piece from David Blight, who's one of the most important US historians and has written quite a bit about African American history. While the latest Trump administration assaults have been an axe to the educational system, the US K through 12 public school system has been in crisis for a long time. Approximately 49 million students participate in K through 12 education in the US. Students, teachers, and parents have been experiencing the lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, which led to the deaths of over 1 million in the US and the closure of in-person teaching for many months in 2020 and 2021. The lack of adequate literacy and numeracy abilities among many students was a major problem prior to the COVID-19 pandemic and was exacerbated by the impact of the pandemic. In general, K through 12 school systems have not been adequately resourced to address class and race-based inequities or to support the increasingly complex needs of neurodiverse learners. Next slide, please. US society is currently bombarded with disinformation, misinformation, and views that promote hatred. There has been a significant decline in reading among all age groups. Among children, only 33% of fourth graders read at or above the proficient level. Among adults, 54% read below the sixth grade level. Educators are also questioning the defects within the current method of teaching reading to children. Some school systems are returning to the older and more effective science of reading, which emphasizes phonics and richer reading material from history and the sciences. Book bans, especially of books related to LGBTQ identity, racism, and African American history at school libraries, continue to be organized through advocacy groups or legislation at local and state levels. online violence and gun violence continue to be a major concern for students, teachers, and parents. There are also many questions and concerns about the pros and cons of using high technology and artificial intelligence in the educational system. Marianne Wolf's Reader Come Home has analyzed the ways in which the over-reliance on screen reading is rewiring the minds of youth and people of all ages, and making people more prone to disinformation and lack of empathy. She advocates a return to deep reading to promote critical thinking and empathy. Jonathan Haidt's Anxious Generation, a book that has been on the New York Times bestseller list for almost a year, argues that the unrestricted use of smartphones has made children and youth sleep deprived, socially deprived, deficient in attention, and prone to addiction. He advocates phone-free schools and more time for in-person and face-to-face interaction and free play in schools and after school and at home. Faced with the decline in the US student population and a global refugee crisis leading until recently to an influx of new migrant families with children, there is a great need for humane and empathetic integration of new students from various cultures and languages. At the same time, the Trump administration's assault on undocumented and documented immigrants, its mass deportations and mass detentions of immigrants have caused a great deal of distress for immigrant children who are avoiding school or attending school with constant fear that either they will be deported or one of their family members or parents will be deported. In the words of Jennifer Berkshire, the public education, who is one of the education scholars that we read for today, one of her essays was in the syllabus. In her words, the public education system needs to be defended, improved, and maintained because it is about promoting the public good, shared values, and equity. In the absence of a public education system that promotes these values, society descends further and further into hatred and violence, which is what we're seeing today. In the words of Professor of Education Henry Giraud, education should be seen as the need to create informed and knowledgeable citizens. So what kind of system of education is needed to develop informed and knowledgeable citizens who can think critically and not fall prey to disinformation, right-wing populism, and fascism? Next slide, please. Okay, now critical thinking versus artificial intelligence. Next slide, please. We began this class series by defining humanism as the idea that humans can come together around universal concepts and use their potential for reasoning to solve problems. The most basic requirement for humanism is shared meaning and shared knowledge. It requires a public that reads. In class 1 on labor and economy and class 2 on gender, sexuality, and the family, we address some of the economic, social, and psychological aspects of a humanist alternative to capitalist alienation. One of the key concepts discussed was the need to break with the capitalist concept of time, or the capitalist concept of time for monetary value production, in favor of time for meaningful, thoughtful labor and leisure. We established that such a break would require a revolutionary transcendence of the capitalist mode of production, led by working class people and all who suffer from the ills of capitalism. And that would have to be a global effort and not simply a local or national one. The fact that current literature on the crisis of education, and especially the work of Marianne Wolf and Jonathan Haidt, also discusses the deleterious effects of fast online reading and lack of concentration and reflection, shows that our system of education is directly affected by the capitalist concept of time, whether capitalism is named as the culprit by scholars of education or not. No, actually, could you stay at the previous slide? Thank you. No, go back. Back to, yes, quick, thank you so much. Capitalism, in its drive to extract more and more monetary value from fewer employed human beings relative to the volume of capital investment, replaces as many human workers as possible in favor of machines. Capitalism still needs human beings to come up with original ideas, which only the creativity and spontaneity of the human mind and no machine can come up with. However, ultimately, capitalism only needs a thin sector of highly skilled mental workers and a large number of lower skilled people who can be cogs in machines or do the work that cannot be routinized and mechanized. Having established these points about capitalism and education, now we can return to the concept of critical humanist thinking. So a basic book on critical thinking begins with the concept of logical reasoning and the ways in which logical arguments can be made and properly defended. Such a basic approach teaches us that in a standard deductive argument, the conclusions have to flow from the premises. If that is the case, the argument is considered valid. If the premises are also true, the argument is considered sound. However, there is so much more to critical thinking than this standard presentation. In the work of Marianne Wolf, we have a humanist approach that goes much further and begins with what she calls deep reading. Wolf is concerned that in the age of the internet and online reading, we read too fast and do not take the time to comprehend and analyze what we read. She urges us to slow down and to recognize the different speeds required for online and print reading. She also recommends reading highly meaningful books in print, word by word, and not skimming. Wolf argues that deep readers approach a text with internalized background knowledge. And by internalized, she means background knowledge that you've accumulated over the years. So you approach a text with internalized background knowledge, including conceptual frameworks. These conceptual frameworks need to be flexible, enough to be open to new ideas, changes, expansion, and enrichment. They also enable us to do the following: draw meaning, make inferences, analyze, evaluate the writer's assumptions, ideas, conclusions, reflect on the whole process, all in order to arrive at new insights and thoughts. So as you can see, the way Marianne Wolf breaks it down, deep reading is very complicated and it really requires attention and time and concentration. Reading for meaning requires attention and concentration, remembering what we have read, taking notes, following the sequence of the text, narrative, drawing connections between the observations and questions gleaned, putting oneself in the position of the author and the characters, following the logic of the author's argument or plot. And the same applies even to a conversation. This is what it takes to really engage with someone in a meaningful conversation. It is through such a deep reading and engagement process that Woolf argues we develop empathy for other humans and become open to new ideas. She says, we welcome the other as a guest within ourselves, and sometimes we become other. For a moment in time, we leave ourselves, and when we return, sometimes expanded and strengthened, we are changed both intellectually and emotionally. I think this is just such a beautiful passage about the meaning of deep reading and about how deep reading and engagement allows us to become better, more empathetic human beings and more knowledgeable human beings with an open mind. This process, I would argue, is the key to a critical thinking that goes beyond the formal logic of creating standard deductive arguments and examining the pros and cons of our positions in a debate format. Although that is also very important. I'm not dismissing that. We need to know that too. But I'm saying that critical thinking is much more than that. It requires an educational system that equips students of all ages with conceptual frameworks and background knowledge on science, on history, economics, philosophy, literature, art. These conceptual frameworks need to be solid, but also open to further development to allow humans to engage with new realities and ideas and keep expanding knowledge and a vision of the future. As a student of philosophy, and in particular of Hegelian philosophy, I would argue that developing such an educational system can also benefit greatly from consulting the ideas of George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, specifically on dialectical thinking. In Hegelian logic, categories and concepts are derived from experience and are developed further in light of experience and encounters with other ideas and challenges. Hegelian critical thinking is about grasping the whole of a process, be it a book or a conversation, grasping the whole of a process or the history of a country or the history of your own life. So it's about grasping the whole of a process in its movement with its internal contradictions and possibilities for forward movement or retrogression. This grasping of the whole of a process or work in its movement is the pathway to developing new ideas and new categories. Next slide, please. At a time when artificial intelligence is being presented as the greatest development on the horizon and as the determinant for the future of humanity, it is extremely important to know the difference between critical, dialectical, humanist thinking and artificial intelligence or machine thinking. In machine thinking, I call artificial intelligence machine thinking. In machine thinking, we have generative AI or generative artificial intelligence, which finds patterns in large masses of information without distinguishing between fact and disinformation or bias. Then we have predictive artificial intelligence, which makes predictions based about the future on the basis of patterns found. And of course, we have artificial general intelligence or AGI, which claims to do all the cognitive tasks that a human can do and is also capable of scheming and deception. A society based on greater reliance on artificial intelligence replaces more and more humans with machines. Not to mention that enormous amounts of energy and water are used at the expense of human needs in order to keep AI data centers cool and active. It can be argued that from the point of view of developing a humanist alternative, next slide, please. So from the point of view of developing a humanist alternative, artificial intelligence is not an alternative. Finding patterns in large masses of information and making predictions based on those patterns is not critical thinking. Even when artificial intelligence produces essays or other works that amaze us, it is only reproducing and rearranging the already existing texts and works written by humans that have been fed to it by a large language model. Artificial intelligence cannot offer us genuinely new and original ideas. At the very least, for artificial intelligence to be useful, its large language model has to be entirely accurate and not full of disinformation in order for it to find correct patterns in the data that it's given. In contrast, critical humanist thinking is about deep reading and deep engagement with reality, history, science, philosophy, art, and a variety of ideas. It is about helping all members of society to challenge and expand their minds and develop new ideas for human solidarity and well-being. The goal of critical humanist thinking in a post-capitalist society is not to produce workers who are cogs in a capitalist machine, but to allow humans to build on what Marianne Wolf calls their, and this is a quote from Marianne Wolf, their pluripotential capacities to embody all of our species' exponentially growing intellectual, affective, and moral faculties. In other words, she thinks that true critical thinking is about really allowing the human mind to expand so that it builds on its pluripotential capacities. Such a system of education requires a combination of study and activity, dialogue and discussion, exposure to a variety of books and ideas, and a society with free movement of peoples without borders. So now that we've discussed some ideas about critical humanist thinking, or critical humanist thinking versus artificial intelligence, let's take a burning issue of the day and show how it can be tackled through critical thinking. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. In August of 2019, journalist and author Nikole Hannah-Jones produced a special issue of the New York Times Magazine entitled The 1619 Project. This issue was published on the 400th anniversary of the entry of the first group of enslaved Africans to Jamestown. Hannah-Jones's essay was entitled, "Our Democracy's Founding Ideals Were False When They Were Written. Black Americans have fought to make them real." Her essay became the subject of much protest from some academics and attacks from the right, because she argued that one of the primary reasons our founding fathers wanted independence from Britain was the desire to continue the institution of slavery. At a time when anti-slavery sentiments in Britain were growing, and there was growing fear that staying with Britain would mean, growing fear on the part of the founding fathers that staying with Britain would mean the abolition of slavery in the colonies. Hannah Jones also reiterated some well-known facts about how Thomas Jefferson originally had a passage in the Declaration of Independence that called slavery a crime, but later removed that passage. She correctly stated that the passage regarding liberty and justice for all in the Declaration of Independence was only meant for propertied white men. The US Constitution allowed for the extension of the slave trade until 1820. So that's about 30 years after the Constitution. 70 years. No, I'm sorry, 89? Yes. Yeah, just about 30 years after the Constitution was written. So the US Constitution allowed for the extension of the slave trade until 1820. It also allowed for the Fugitive Slave Act and recognized enslaved Africans as 3/5 of humans and not full humans. Hannah Jones added that even Abraham Lincoln, who is known as a liberator and the president who signed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, did so because the North could not find enough volunteers to fight in the Civil War, a war which, from the vantage point of Lincoln and other Northern leaders, was about stopping the secession of the South and not abolishing slavery. It was only when the formerly enslaved Africans joined the army of the North and fought valiantly to turn the direction of the war that Lincoln too evolved and moved in a more progressive direction. And here, I'm not denying that Lincoln really did move in a progressive direction. And I'm not trying to bash Lincoln entirely, but I think that Nicole Hannah Jones's critique is very well taken. Hannah Jones's essay emphasizes that formerly enslaved Africans refused to take up Lincoln's earlier offer to be sent back to Africa. Instead, they built the first civil rights movement during the period of Reconstruction from 1865 to 1877. They joined with white abolitionists to write the most democratic constitutions the Southern states had ever had. And most significantly, the new Black legislators pushed for a universal state-funded system of schools and enshrined it in state constitutions. That effort established the first public school system that became a significant achievement of US democracy. As we know, these efforts at creating a genuine democracy in the South were reversed brutally after President Rutherford B. Hayes removed the Northern Army from the South in 1877 and allowed for a new reign of terror and a new system of slavery and racial segregation to be established by former Confederate leaders and Southern whites who believed that African Americans were inferior. It took another civil rights movement almost 100 years later to reestablish the gains that had been made by the post-Civil War amendments to the US Constitution and the Black legislators that had briefly established a democracy in the South. Next slide, please. It is this effort by Hannah Jones and other African American and other historians to discuss important and ignored aspects of US history that offer genuine models for applying critical thinking to US history. These are examples, I would argue, that students of history need to emulate. And it is this effort at critical thinking and engagement with history that the Trump administration seeks to erase with their Project 2025 executive orders, shutting down of the Department of Education, defunding schools and universities that promote DEI and free speech. Instead, they want to standardize a revisionist history that glorifies naked capitalist exploitation, racism, sexism, homophobia, and imperialism. They want a privatized and religious education system that takes us back in time and erases the gains made by civil rights, women's rights, labor rights, and gay rights movements. They want total retrogression on all fronts. Next slide, please. Okay, so conclusion, what can we do now? Next slide. In my work with librarians, I have emphasized that librarians have an important role to play in helping people of all ages develop critical thinking skills. This can be as basic as helping people learn to concentrate. Promoting critical thinking and deep reading requires library programs that help patrons acquire background knowledge and conceptual frameworks. And those can be very creative ones, whether it's book discussions or discussions on our US history or discussions on issues of the day. Or discussions on philosophical issues, whether it's for kids or teens or adults. And there are some excellent sources that we can use for that purpose, not only the librarians, but members of the general public, if they're interested, they can have access to those sources too. Excellent sources for talking to children about philosophical issues, issues like empathy, justice, solidarity, generosity, talking to teens about interpersonal relations, about US history, about human solidarity, and also for adults. There are, of course, many more resources for discussing these issues with adults. Promoting critical thinking among members of the public also requires organizing news literacy workshops and current world events discussions. And not only for adults, but also for teenagers. The Social Responsibilities Roundtable of the American Library Association has produced some pathfinders on current world events that are available on its websites, and people can use them, and members of the public can use them if they want to help organize discussions on current world events. You can write letters to your local and national papers and sites defending education, critical thinking in education, participate in community discussions, challenge the ways in which capitalism is trying to subject us all to machine thinking, discuss banned books and censored US history. You can oppose the dehumanization, deportation, and imprisonment of immigrants, oppose anti-immigrant hatred. I look forward to your questions and comments. Here's a list of some of the references that I used for this presentation. And next slide, please. And here's my contact information and information about my websites. Thank you so much.